Hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today we're getting back to our series on local Hawaiian classics with a shot at one of my favorite pies from my childhood, which is the chocolate coconut Haupia cream pie found at the legendary Ted's Bakery in Oahu. For those who are unfamiliar, Ted's Bakery is a local institution dating back to the mid-80s on the North Shore of Oahu, where you'll find some of the most premier surfing locations in the world. Ted's Bakery is well known for sporting a wide variety of menu items to serve to local surfers and beachgoers, but by far their most legendary item is the chocolate Haupia cream pie, which, for those who are unfamiliar, is a multi-layer cream pie with a thick and rich dark chocolate cream bottom layer, a coconut cream Haupia center layer, and a whipped coconut cream topping. Now, contrary to what I've always assumed, because that chocolate layer does look like pudding, our cream layers don't actually rely on gelatin or oven time to set in their solid form, but actually use a good old-fashioned cornstarch slurry, which you'll recognize from basically all of our stir-fries. We'll be making use of my favorite flaky pie crust recipe, courtesy of Bon Appetit, but of course, if you're looking for shortcuts, pre-made pie crusts are always okay in my book. And finally, as with pretty much every baking adventure on this channel, there were many mistakes made in my attempts, which we'll absolutely be touching on as well. Okay, so let's get into it.
Baby hair with a woman's eyes, I can feel you watching in the night, all alone with me.
Okay, so kicking things off here first, I'm starting off with maybe the thickest cornstarch slurry that I have ever made. This is a half a cup of cornstarch combined with 3/4 cup of water. As with our stir-fry recipes, we're going to use the starch here to thicken up our cream fillings in a moment, but we want this to be in a liquid form before going in, or else you may end up with clumps of cornstarch left behind. Next up is my chocolate here. I'm using a fairly high 86% cacao dark chocolate, which is going to give us a super rich but also not overwhelmingly sweet chocolate layer. This also does mean that it's not very good snacking chocolate though, because it has very little sugar in it. Well, this is about 6.5 ounces or 2 bars worth that I'm rough chopping and setting aside. Next up, I'm weighing out the weight of my empty saucepan here. Now, this might seem kind of random and cryptic, but I promise it's gonna make sense in a second. I think this saucepan weighed something like 22 ounces. Then over on the stove, I've got my saucepan over medium-low simmering heat, and I'm adding a 1/4 cup of coconut cream, 3/4 cup heavy cream, a single cup of white sugar, and a cup of water to round all of this out. I'm bringing this all to a gentle simmer for about 5 minutes until that sugar has dissolved, and then I'm adding my cornstarch slurry. Now, at this point, I'll admit I was pretty skeptical. I've been using cornstarch slurries in stir-fries for years and have never seen it yield anything remotely looking like a cream or a custard texture. But lo and behold, about 3 minutes later over a gentle simmer, and seemingly magically, our cream thickens up into a wonderfully luxurious thick texture. Ooh. Then back over on our scale, we're weighing out our saucepan one more time and subtracting the difference of our empty pot so that we may remove exactly half of our cream filling. See, I told you it would make sense. We're setting this reserved coconut cream aside for a moment, then bringing our pot back to the stove over medium-low heat and adding our chocolate to the remaining filling. I'm also adding about a 1/4 cup of water here to help get things going since our cream was looking a little bit tight. Then I'm gently stirring for another 2 minutes until our chocolate melts and combines into what looks like a chocolate pudding. Now, very important because this is about when things started going horribly wrong for me. It is not actually chocolate pudding because it is not assembled with gelatin, meaning that once this stuff cools down, unlike pudding, whatever container that it's in is the shape that it's gonna stay in. So if you say set this aside in the fridge while you work on your pie crust, you're gonna have some trouble doing much of anything with this stuff once you circle back around to it because it will have solidified into the shape of the bowl. So for your own attempts at this point, if you're using a pre-made pie crust, then great, we're ready to go. But if you're making your own pie crust like we are here, you're gonna want to do your pie crust before doing this filling so that the cream doesn't set while your crust bakes, like mine did. Alright, so now that we've gotten those warnings out of the way, we're gonna go with the classic Bon Appetit pie crust here, which I totally forgot, but is actually intended for 2 crusts, so I'm gonna go ahead and half our quantities in my voiceover and written recipes for you all. This is 1 1/4 cup AP flour going into my mixing bowl, combined with half a teaspoon of white sugar and a pinch of kosher salt. We're mixing these dry ingredients to combine, then chopping up 1 stick of unsalted butter and tossing that in as well. Ideally very cold but not frozen like mine is, because this was kinda hard to work with. I'm following this up with 1 1/2 tablespoons of ice water and half a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, then kneading until a cohesive dough forms. I'm forming this into a disc and reminding myself that next time it is absolutely worth dragging out the stand mixer for pie crusts, wrapping my pie dough into plastic and setting this in the fridge to cool down for at least 1 hour or ideally overnight. Our goal here is to keep that butter from melting as we work with it. The next morning, we're bringing back out our pie dough, which should look more or less the same. I'm dividing mine in half again because I made too much. Then I'm liberally flouring my work surface, and I'm starting off by banging the living shit out of my disc with a rolling pin. I swear that this actually does help. Then next, I'm buckling down and we're rolling this thing out into 12 by 12 inches in size, or basically large enough to liberally cover our entire 9-inch pie tin. Then we're using this sweet Claire saffet trick and rolling the dough up onto our rolling pin so that we can pick it up and transfer it onto our pie tin. And yes, I am well aware that our dough is very cracked and split. That's okay, don't panic. We're just pressing the dough into the pie pan, then trimming off the bits that are hanging over the sides and using those extra scraps to fill in the errant cracks and holes until we have everything nicely shaped. Finally, I'm weighing down my pie with some dry rice so that it doesn't pop up during the bake. You can also use dry beans or actual pie weights if you've got them. In either case though, first we want to line that pie tin with parchment paper so that we don't bake rice into the pie dough. Wesley, duh. Then I'm popping this into a 400-degree F oven for 20 minutes or until golden brown. Finally, we're using our parchment paper to remove our rice. This, by the way, is still totally edible rice, so don't throw this away. You can absolutely cook with this and still eat it. Then we're letting this pie crust cool for at least 1 hour at room temperature. Meanwhile, while our crust cools, I'm getting to work on our coconut whipped cream topping here. This is 1 cup of heavy cream going into my mixing bowl first. Then next, this is a fun and useful trick to use. I've got my coconut cream that has been sitting in the refrigerator for about an hour, or basically long enough so that the solids have separated from the liquids. Then I'm skimming off 8 tablespoons of the solids here and leaving that liquid behind. This is gonna give us a higher concentration of fat in our cream, which is gonna allow us to add more coconut to our whipped cream while still being able to whip our cream to stiff peaks properly. As with our rice though, that liquid left behind is still totally edible as well. It's basically just coconut water, so set that aside for your mixed drinks later on. Finally, I'm rounding this all out with a 1/4 cup of white sugar and vigorously whisking for 5 minutes until stiff peaks form, like so. Okay, so back over with our pie crust 1 hour later. We're ready to assemble our pie here. Now, if you did this correctly and in the proper order, your filling should just now be coming off of the stovetop in a very liquid and loose form. If you're a big dummy like me though, and you did the creams the night before with the pie dough, you'll likely have very solid creams in your bowls at this point. This isn't the end of the world, you don't have to restart. I'm just throwing this back over medium-low heat, letting it simmer for about 5 minutes with a little bit of extra water, and whisking to break up the clumps until our cream returns to liquid form. Crisis averted. I'm adding our chocolate cream in here first and spreading it out into an even layer. Then I'm following this up with my reserved coconut cream next. And yes, if you've done this correctly, these two should stay separated from each other very nicely. Then last up, I'm topping this off with my whipped coconut cream here. Now, I'm definitely not equipped to do any fancy finishing design, so I'm doing probably the simplest frosting design ever and using the bottom of a spoon to create divots in the cream. Finally, I'm topping this all off with some fresh nutmeg, then God help me, we're letting this all cool in the refrigerator for another hour. Yes, seriously, because if you cut into this too early, those cream layers will fully merge into each other and you'll have a hot mess. Finally, 1 hour later, we're diving in and we're ready to eat. Alright, so as many of you likely know, I don't consider myself to be the greatest baker on the internet. This skill set fully falls well outside of my comfort zone. As you might have noticed, there isn't a wok in sight today. That said though, I actually thought that this was a pretty approachable and doable pie, and yes, I have done some pretty tough ones for holiday seasons past. The only real portion involving any oven time was the pie crust, which was not terribly difficult, and if you're using a pre-made pie crust, this whole recipe becomes a no-bake pie, which I love. To add to all of that, while at first glance this pie might look overwhelmingly rich and sweet because of how deeply dark that chocolate layer is, the relatively low amount of sugar that we used keeps things in check fairly well. The coconut cream adds a nice richness that isn't overwhelming, as coconut often is, and really pairs well with that rich dark chocolate. Now, to be fair, I love chocolate and will literally eat anything with chocolate in it, but I know in my family chocolate pies are a divisive subject, and this one fared pretty well over Thanksgiving. So if you're spending the holidays this year with chocolate skeptics like me, this is a great one to take a shot at. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a larger series that we've been doing that's dedicated to recreating Hawaiian classics from Oahu, where I spent a lot of my childhood. So definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet, because there's a lot of these. For those who are returning to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell as well. Only about 30% of you all who are watching are actually subscribed, which if you're like me, you probably don't even realize is you, but it actually helps us out quite a bit though. For the Hawaii locals and visitors, Ted's Bakery is in Haleiwa on the North Shore of Oahu and is an absolutely legendary bakery, so definitely stop by if you have the chance. For the Bay Area locals, the Wu Can Cook Fried Rice pop-up is back at the Hayward Farmers Market this Saturday, so swing by and come say hi then if you can. More about that at wucancook.com/eats. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice people, and I'll see you soon. Bye.